All right, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sarah Husky with 3C Ren, and I've started recording this course, which will be posted on our on-demand page. We're here today to talk about acceptance testing and commissioning for non-residential projects. Before we get going, I just have a couple of slides to run through. We just ask that everyone make sure they're on mute throughout the duration of the course. If you'd like to verbally participate or ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll call on you to unmute yourself. We'll also be monitoring the chat box, so feel free to ask any questions there as well. So a few words about who we are. We're the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, also known as 3C Ren. We are a collaborative partnership between the counties of San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, working to improve energy efficiency in our region by offering free programs and services for building professionals and households. 3C Ren is funded by ratepayer dollars, which are collected through the public goods charge found on our utility bills. So the benefit of that is we are ratepayer funded and there's no cost to provide these services. 3C Ren currently offers 3 programs, and the first of which is the Energy Code Connect program. This program serves building professionals by offering Title 24 support for everyone from plans examiners and inspectors to architects and contractors. Within this program, we also offer our Energy Code Coach service, which is a over the phone, online, and in the field support for Title 24 related questions for residential and non-residential. And another program we have is our building performance training, which serves building professionals by offering technical and soft skill trainings relating to building science principles, high performance buildings, and communication techniques. And then lastly, we have our own home energy savings program, which incentivizes contractors and helps residents save money to make their homes healthier with energy efficient upgrades through incentives and rebates. And with that, I'll pass things over to Andy Pease and Jennifer Rennick from Imbalance Green Consulting.
Great, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here to partner with 3C Ren to be an education provider and also to support their Code Coach services. Jennifer and I are both architects. Jennifer is also a certified energy analyst. I'm a lead accredited professional. And so those two things have combined well to be able to support energy code and education. So we are a small group today. So I see Todd has chimed in on the chat in terms of objectives, helping to educate public works contractors that are unfamiliar with the process. Absolutely glad to know kind of what the target is. If any of the others of you would like to introduce yourself and say if you're in the jurisdiction side or an engineer or a contractor, just so that we can target. And with a small enough group, just raise your hand, unmute and say hi, any of those types of things. We want to make sure that we use this time for you. This is worth learning units. We're going over mostly focused on the energy code requirements as well as Cal Green in terms of kind of that non-residential commissioning, acceptance testing, and making sure folks know the forms and the documents and the triggers and what tools are available. So just making sure we're on the same page in our terminology here, the energy code, which we nicknamed Title 24, but of course is part 6 of Title 24. And then we'll also be touching on part 11, which is the California Green Building Code, Green Building Standards, which we nicknamed Cal Green. Commissioning refers to the process for the design and testing of equipment or systems, so we'll nickname that CX. And acceptance testing is the functional testing itself and documentation of the testing. So one's a whole about the process and one's about the specific testing requirements. So before we talk about acceptance testing, we're going to walk through the whole commissioning process, what triggers it and what the requirements are. And, you know, we're fans of commissioning. So although some people might feel like, oh my God, you know, how can I get through yet one more requirement? But we feel like since it is a requirement, let's do it well. Let's make it effective to be able to make better buildings and happier clients. So the triggers are non-residential occupancies. And even in a mixed use, that you're going to be doing the non-res portions, not the residential. It does the non-res portions of a hotel motel, high-rise multifamily, if they trigger that non-res requirement. And it is new construction, but that also includes the initial tenant improvement build out. So if you do a big shell building and maybe the shell is a cold shell, nothing to commission yet, when you do the commercial interiors, that will trigger it. So, but only on the first one. Second ones count as alterations or and wouldn't trigger. So, and then we'll touch on this more, but there's kind of two levels of commissioning. 10,000 square feet is the trigger. So full commissioning is required for 10,000 square feet or more. And then there's kind of a commissioning light, which is really about the design review process. And there's still some forms to go along with that. So non-residential projects under 10,000 square feet. And then we'll also touch on energy code and differentiating with Cal Green because it's covered in both. So the process includes, and we'll go through these, but this is kind of the start to finish about the owner project requirement and basis of design. There's a design review component that Cal Green does not require, but it's required here, so you got to do it anyway. Then we'll talk about the specific measures and how to show them, the commissioning plan, the actual testing, kind of ties in with the acceptance testing, and then the closeout. So the systems, what needs to be commissioned? It's really the main thing is systems are things that use energy. So per the energy code, it's going to be all of your HVAC, your mechanical ventilation, all the controls that are going to be used need to be checked. Hydronic and chiller systems, economizers, heat recovery, etc. Domestic hot water. Commercial kitchen exhaust, fume hoods, that type of thing, lighting controls, and receptacles, etc. Cal Green has a whole nother layer, and that's going to be covered process loads. There's a bunch of those. We'll touch on that when we talk about acceptance testing. Plus, Cal Green puts in renewable energy, irrigation, and water reuse systems. So all of those will go together. All right, and so the general roadmap of the requirements, I did see that one quick question come in terms of does the commissioning light require the OPR BOD? Shorter answer is no, but you might want to do that anyway in order to be able to move on to the, be able to accomplish the design review part, but you don't have to. So this is the general roadmap of requirements. We also call this the circle of accountability because we think of it as not just a linear A to F as much as a start that circle back on itself. So it starts with the owner, and the owner describes what they want in terms of what are the outcomes, what are the performance outcomes, and that generates the owner project requirements. That might be, we want this light level, we want this expected duration of performance, we want to be able to control this and such, etc. So they're, you know, what do they want when the building is done? That then goes to the design team. They create a basis of design, and so that needs to support the owner project requirements. Here's how we are meeting that OPR. Then there's a design review meeting. There's a kickoff for the design review with the design reviewer and the design team. Then we circle to that code requirement for design reviewer. We'll talk about that more, who's involved, at what size, it depends. size of the building, about who can do the review. Might be in-house, might be third party. And so they go and make sure, like, okay, BOD, OPR, all those things are lining up. Then we go to this commissioning agent who is confirming, has been a part of this process, and then generates the commissioning plan. That's a written document that walks through all of the requirements. So then all of those pieces come together, then we build the building. There's some process along the way there, but the performance test is that key piece that we feel like has been, folks are struggling with. Hey, how do I do this? You know, what triggers that? And there's a couple players that are involved there. The certified testing technicians are going to be doing the performance test. The commissioning agent is going to be verifying that those tests have been performed. And all of that then circles back to the owner to make sure, does this thing perform to what the owner wanted in the first place? So that's the commissioning report at the end to make sure that all of these pieces have come together to get the performance metrics accounted for. So there you go, commissioning accountability. There's a form, a CXRE. It used to look like this. Now there's an online form, but we're going to use both because this is easier to kind of capture, and it's the same information, but now it's kind of online. So, you know, again, just demystifying. We've got, you know, the name, the project size, the requirements, OPR, there's links, etc. But the new 2022 code, it's an online kind of an interview format. And so the different menu options will open up depending on the size of your building. So if your building is under 10,000 square feet, it will only ask you for the design review portions of that form. But if it's over 10,000, it'll ask you more questions about the specifics of the project. So I always forget to mention, until a time like this, you will get a copy of the slides, so you don't have to memorize everything. And so some of these slides will be pretty dense, and that's because we feel like, well, then you have it as a resource when we're done. And then if you're listening to the recording, you can always request the PDF as well. So, so this will have a live link. You can go to the forms. You have to create an account in Energy Code ACE. So that's the kind of the state has this contract with Energy Code ACE to provide all these awesome resources and online forms. Then you locate, you kind of follow out. Jennifer has this all mapped out for you, exactly how to do it. And you click on the CXRE form and fill it in online and pick the one that says that this is the middle option there in terms of complete a certificate of compliance, because otherwise you get thrown into some whole other path that you don't want to be in. Design
kind of loops you around is what it does.
It loops you around.
Oh,
okay.
Pick the middle box.
Yeah, save you a little bit of time, pick the middle box. And then, yeah, the reviewer there. And then there's it will help you to track where you are in that process. And so Jennifer, and throughout this project, this presentation, you'll see that she went ahead and registered a full commissioning test project. And so that's the kind of some of the metrics as we go through that you'll see. There's a scope and the kickoff and the general. Then we'll actually go into the specifics of that, the content for the owner project requirements, basis of design and design review, and then into the closeout kind of documentation. So kind of mapped out, kind of nice. So, so one of the early questions is going to be the design review kickoff meeting. Frankly, I've struggled with the timing of when to put this in, because the design review doesn't happen until 90% CDs. So project is pretty much done at that point, but they like to have the design review kind of early in the process. So you're going over the OPR should be done. It's, you know, by conceptual design, it's kind of part of the programming process. The basis of design is usually accomplished during design development. So if you're going to go over those documents, that's a fine time once you have the OPR and the BOD. to have that kickoff. Who's in the room? For sure, you want to make sure that you have the design reviewer and somebody who's the owner's rep needs to be there. But it's great to have this whole team. We have a photo there of a team from a DMV project in Santa Maria, where we did some early work together to do kind of an integrated design process. So mechanical engineer, structural engineer, owner, maintenance folks, our team, and really they were trying for zero net energy. And there's just a lot to be thinking about. So getting folks together, some ways we think of this almost like an excuse, like, sorry, you have to put everybody together so that you talk. So that's one approach there, but you'll add, it's a pull down menu and you just check off who's there, and then they'll ask for your name and contact information. But for sure, make sure these people in the room, and then usually your design team. And then what are we talking about? Really, we're just reviewing what the goals are in terms of energy efficiency and what the schedule is. And so then when the design reviewer goes through, again, they're just, one more level of accountability. So this will be on the online form. You'll see, again, it'll be the other kind of format, but this helps you to see what are the questions they're going to be asking, what are the kind of the building lifespan, the goals for the efficiency. And sometimes the answer is, per standard construction. It's not like everything needs some, fancy numeric calculation. It might be, regular compliance, but other clients might want a higher level of control or light levels that are different than standards, for example, here. All right, so design review, always required, right? So this is one that gets missed a lot. We have projects that go through, jurisdictions don't always know to ask for it, but the idea here is that you're uploading the form, and if it's less than 10,000 square feet, they're just going to ask for that design review kickoff and the design review, and then it will give you the compliance result that it complies. For 10,000 square feet or more, it's going to ask for those two things and everything else. And until you have kind of a yes to each of those being completed, either on the online form or uploaded, et cetera, then you don't get the comply. So there's something to note here, though, is that it goes all the way through the commissioning documentation training and the commissioning report. For the online form, it's really checking, are you committed to doing this? You're the professional. Are you going to do it? Because this is a document that goes for your permit. So you can see, even though it asks for a commissioning report, yes, that's actually just an endorsement that that you're signing. Yes, I will make sure that all of the construction side of this gets done. Again, kind of a gap here in a bit of a. I think it's difficult for the jurisdictions to be able to get the follow through from the contractors sometimes. There's tools, of course, but that's how we get our compliance. So, going to the design review, who is qualified to do this? It's a licensed professional engineer or architect or a licensed contractor under that team. So it depends on the building size, but also the complexity of the system. So if it's under 10,000 square feet, it can be somebody who's on the team. So the architect of record is allowed to do their own design review. All right. So kind of go through that process, the checklist, check your own work. 10,000 to 50,000 square feet, and not a complex system, just kind of a regular building. It needs to be a qualified engineer or architect. It can be in-house to the firm, but it can't be the person who's in charge of the design, right? So you can't have the architect of record for a building over 10,000 square feet do the design review. What we've seen sometimes is like mechanical engineering firms, they will kind of come up with an agreement to be able to check each other's work. because most firms, many firms, smaller firms only have one licensed professional who is the licensed professional for the firm. So that can be a little tricky, but doable. A project that's over 50,000 square feet must be a third-party firm. And then complex systems that are over 10,000 square feet also require a third party. Complex systems, it turns out, is almost everything. So down here at the bottom, it's the options are it's only a 2-pipe heating only system, or it's only a unitary or package equipment, each serving one zone. That happens. That's maybe reasonable, not as much anymore, or anything else. So then you're like, okay, that's complex. So a lot of buildings that are over 10,000 square feet are going to fall into that complex system requirement and require a third-party engineer or architect or contractor. Okay, so then walking through some of these mandatory measures, we're putting the specific code language in here in terms of what specifically is required. Owner project requirements, we've talked about as an overview. Make it practical, useful, really talk to the owner so that we understand what their goals are. Hey, we're just trying to get to Title 24, or trying to have this kind of return on investment, or whatever their goals are. You can start with a prescriptive baseline so that they know what to expect, and then they can determine if they want to go higher than that. But it's also hours of operation, right? We see a lot of gaps in terms of programming at the end, is that it's kind of like, as determined by the owner. Well, how did the owner write it down? Like, what are the hours of this thing? Because that might make a difference in design, but for sure it makes a difference in how things are set up at the end. And then just, lifespan of equipment and those types of requirements as well. So within that OPR, here's just kind of a little bit of a listing of what's in there. We tend to do this in a Word document so that we kind of have the standard questions to ask and some of the typical answers, and then they can choose. I could talk about metering, like what kind of sub-meters, measurement and verification, controllability, energy management systems, those kinds of requirements, lighting, water heating. We put there in italics, again, renewable energy, irrigation, water reuse, that those are the ones that, if they're applicable, but they are in Cal Green. And then right there, like, who's going to operate this building? Like, talk about it up front. Are you going to have third-party contracts? Is it a big building that has maintenance staff? Like, who needs to be there in order to keep this building up and running once it's going? And, just California has found that that folks are, the buildings aren't performing the way that they're expected to, and that's why commissioning became a requirement, and now increasingly acceptance testing as well. So we install it and walk away, and there's really, until you get a ginormous energy bill, then people start asking questions. So, or lack of comfort, or any of those other, or health issues, honestly. So that's why we're really making sure more emphasis on operations and systems running well in the long run. And then also a great time to ask about reach goals, if they want a certification, if they want zero net energy. Increasingly, we're talking about zero net carbon design. So that might be an all electric building, or lower embodied, selecting materials with lower embodied carbon, and those types of options as well. Went ahead and put in the questions. We won't go through them all now, but it's just to, again, kind of demystify what are the questions when you do that online form that are going to pop up. And our, as we've noted, the tip for us is have a Word document, and I'll show you under BOD, but there's basically a box you can check. I'll attach my own document. So you can fill it out online, which works, sit down with the owner and just type in the answers as you go, especially if it's not if it's a relatively simple programmatic ask, but otherwise a Word document that you can develop and evolve as you get more information about the project. Okay, so that's the OPR. Now we're on the basis of design. Again, professional engineers, designers are really used to making a basis of design. So it's just a matter of making sure that they're answering making sure their basis of design picks up the specific questions that come up from the code expectations. So it's all that heating, HVAC systems, it's the lighting and controls, it's water heating, and it's building envelope components. Interestingly, this is a chance for us because we do a lot of Title 24 energy modeling for energy compliance reports. This is actually kind of a nice time for us to have the architect fill out what they think the envelope is versus what they've either told us or what's in the plans. And so we can make sure that we're getting apples to apples and a really accurate Title 24 report. And it's also, you know, again, if I were on the plan checking side, that would be something to be looking out for. Like, oh, you're saying this on the envelope here, but that's not what's on the plans or on the Title 24 report. So it's a good time to kind of line up your system. Same with HVAC as well. Here's the systems. Again, they look almost exactly like the OPR. In fact, we try to line them up to make it easier for the design team to respond, except it doesn't have as much of the overview. You don't have to talk about the maintenance and operations in terms of that. But otherwise, you kind of try to parallel. OPR says this, we've responded in this way. So that way you have that alignment on the systems. Then you might ask, like, okay, does irrigation, I mean, how big of a BOD can you do for that? Actually pretty big. A landscape architect can really talk about the zones and what the schedule is, because again, that's, you know, water is energy as far as that goes. So logistics of the basis of design, similar. We've got this online form, what's the targeted window to wall ratio, preliminary assemblies, blah, blah, blah. Do the same thing in terms of investing in a Word document and be able to attach your own. So you'll have this kind of early in the forms as you're going through it. Would you like to complete it here? And you can either, I'll attach my own document and then you're kind of done, or I'd like you to walk me through it, and then it has these user-friendly options as you just saw. I think it's nice. I think it's a good process. Okay, so who can be the commissioning authority in the first place? Turns out there's no certification required. Anybody can do it as long as they have this kind of qualitative assessment of technical knowledge, experience. They can't have a conflict of interest, of course. You can't have the architect of record or the engineer of record be the commissioning authority. They should have some certifications or training. Often it's a mechanical engineer, but there are organizations that do commissioning training and then offer a certificate and continuing education, etc. They should be able to communicate and have good organizational skills and make sure they're kind of methodical. You don't want somebody, you want somebody who's going to really drive the process, because if they just wait for the phone to ring, you know, everybody's got a lot on their mind. So especially at the end of the project, lean on these people, because that's their job, is to get all the closeout documentation and training done and all of that. So we like to get on board early toward that OPR. In fact, they can have the OPR templates and help the team walk through the whole thing. Again, they have no direct authority over the work. That's super important. And they are going to advise the owner. If something is not complying, their job is to let somebody else know, but they're not going to be directing a contractor to say, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. They have a log they distribute to everybody so that that you have clear communication along the way. the commissioning measures and commissioning plan kind of go hand in hand. So basically somebody has to figure out, okay, you've got the owner project requirements and the basis of design. How are we physically going to test this in the field to make sure that everything is working? What's the plan in order to commission this building? And so the commissioning measures, what's going to be required, that goes in the specifications. It can be in like a book format of the specifications. It can be on the plan set, but it's walking through about what systems are going to be commissioned. And then the commissioning authority develops the commissioning plan that kind of assembles, points to those specifications, lists the systems that are going to be required, has the whole, the team as available at that point. And kind of, again, there's a template about what needs to be included. And so all of those things, so OPR, BOD, commissioning, the design review, the measures, the commissioning plan, all of that packaged up, that should be part of your building permit. So yeah, so that's the permit, should all be done ahead of time. Old days, we used to bring on a commissioning authority during construction. Now all of that has to be done during design and permitting. All right, so then just kind of, you know, the rest of the commissioning process, we'll kind of get into here, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer to talk about some of the specifics of the testing. Not required by code, but a really good practice is the commissioning kickoff. So we've had the design review kickoff, that's all design team side, but kind of sometime before rough-in that you want to have a commissioning kickoff. It's going to have the commissioning authority, the general contractor, subcontractors, usually an owner rep, maybe architect, engineer if they're involved in, ideally, those folks as well. The agenda is usually just kind of walking through the commissioning plan. Here you can see everybody gathered around a table. Okay, that's a stock photo, but really they look like this. You've probably seen them. It's kind of, you know, the construction photo with or construction trailer with a wall paneling, etc. So that's a good process, not required, not specifically listed out in the code as a requirement, though. Just sets you up for success. The commissioning plan prior to permit. Oh, sorry, this would have been one earlier. So systems to be commissioned.
You want me to jump in? I may have messed up the order.
All right, did you have something you wanted to talk about on this one? I don't remember the slide.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. The commissioning plan. Okay, so Andy just went over that, but kind of back to what's actually sort of spelled out in the code in section 120.8, the commissioning plan. It just says that that's going to be, has to be done. And it's got to include general project information, commissioning goals, the systems to be commissioned. And then it specifically says and addresses the plans for testing. And then it says, okay, and it says which shall include. And now they list in the 2022 code what you are supposed to include in that commissioning plan. And some of the biggest things that Annie mentioned was the functions that are to be tested, conditions under which the test shall be performed. There's measurable criteria for acceptable performance. And then G, it's the last item there, specifically says that you have to have the requirements listed in sections G, H, and I. And that's basically what we're going to go through next, is what G, H, and I, and that is like the functional performance testing has to be included. So I just keep going from here, Andy?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. And so the functional performance tests, they're supposed to demonstrate the correct installation and operation of each of those components in accordance with those acceptance test requirements. And the code now, it kind of spells out a few sections that you have to test. It includes all the mechanical, that lighting controls. It includes some of the process, but new to the code cycle is section 160.3 and 160.5. That has to do with the common spaces in multifamily mixed use projects. So since there's a whole new code section for multifamily, there's now a new part, a new reference under those mandatory measures of what areas have to have the functional performance testing. And then Cal Green, it really references the energy code and references similar requirements for that functional testing. And the big point here is really to make sure, is everything in working order? That's the main thing. And before we get into, or part of that functional testing process, is there something that is known as pre-functional testing that essentially is checklist of items that need to be looked at before the commissioning agent will come out and see that everything has been functionally tested and is operational. And so here's a couple examples of pre-functional testing checklists from a project we're currently working on, where this part of this building is has a large community center for retirement housing that includes a professional kitchen, but they can have a lot of online meals. There's a restaurant associated with it. There's a lot of other amenities. And so that portion of the project falls under needing commissioning. So there's a pre-functional checklist for the variable refrigerant heat pumps. And some of this stuff can include really simple things like, for example, are the air filters installed? So you don't want your commissioning agent to come out there if the folks haven't got the pipe insulation on the pipes yet, or if there's kinks in the piping, or if those air filters aren't there, or if they haven't gone through and verified some of the other systems that are up and operational. And same sort of thing for the irrigation systems that Cal Green requires. And then once those checklists have gone through, that commissioning agent takes those checklists as, okay, yep, you filled this out. We're ready to actually do the functional testing. And again, the functional testing, the commissioning agent doesn't, like Andy said, doesn't direct the work, but they observe. And they're there to see that these functional tests are being done and that they're either meeting or not meeting the certain criteria. And so for each of these functional tests, there's a set of test instructions that set up what is going to be the criteria, and whether at each step it's pass or a fail, or just information that's needed, and the results of those tests. And they can do all of the pieces of equipment, for example, need to go through functional testing, but your commissioning agent can do sampling, and it's usually ratio of like 1 to 6. So they might get a stack of like 7 papers that have been filled out for the functional testing, and then the commissioning agent could randomly choose one and say, okay, walk me through this. Let's make sure this thing is really working. And then the couple of these pictures and this tool is from the commissioning agent we work with, has a story where very easy to use temperature gun where you can used that to measure the temperature of outcoming air, for example, supply air, and it appeared that all the equipment was working. But through this process of like sampling and just making a few measurements here and there, it has a very easy to use tool. It's very low cost, has very high benefit. But anyway, Andy might know a little bit more, but they tested that and said, oh, hey, wait a minute. This equipment is high up. It's inaccessible. We can't reach it. So this temperature gun was a good way to do some spot checking. And they realized that one of these pieces of equipment, one of the heaters up high, was not actually producing the right temperature of air. And so they were able to catch that. That's very, very valuable to the ownership and to the occupants. They caught it early. And from all intents purposes, it appeared that the equipment was working fine. Like the fans came on, the thermostat seemed to be operating. It wasn't noticeable that that one piece of equipment didn't have quite the output because all the others were sort of making up for it. So anything you want to add to that one, Andy?
No, I think that pretty much describes it. And it was a great save for the contractor too, because then they could go back to the, it turns out it came from the factory, not set correctly. So they were able to capture it while it was, before the building was occupied, and it was a good catch.
Yeah, oh, that's right. Yeah, I think that's key. It came from the factory that way. Testing for all functionality. And I mean, this and even includes, there's acceptance testing protocols for exhaust fans in the bathrooms, especially if they're being used for introducing the outside air. And so some of the questions that are answered during this process is, are these outside air scheduled to be operational continuously or operationally intermittent? Is it set just strictly for bathroom use? You flip it on when you need exhaust and otherwise it's off? Or if it's part of the outside air system, is it a balanced system? In other words, is there an outside supply air that makes up for that continuous exhaust? And are they interlocked properly? Are they connected with each other? And then we've got an example of a project we worked on where that piece of information, where this exhaust fan was supposed to operate continuously and be part of a balanced system with outside air introduced, somehow that had gotten missed and wasn't picked up in these documents, and then wasn't picked up in the commissioning. But well, actually, I take that back. It did get picked up in the commissioning. And so it was like, oh, wow, it wasn't caught in the construction side of it. And so we did end up having to go back to the engineers and to the design team and say, okay, these things, they have to be interconnected. What's the solution? And there was a viable solution where we were able to utilize a knockout in the heating and cooling system for each of these spaces that provided the balanced outside air and with the damper. So it worked out, but catching that before occupancy, catching that before the construction was finished, I mean, that was a huge for the owner. It could have been worse. Classic example of why commissioning is worth it has to do with economizers. And if you're not that familiar with economizers, what we mean by economizers is on your heating and cooling system, you're basically able to introduce a lot of outside air into the air handler that goes into the building. And when the temperature is right and the air is cool and you're calling for air conditioning, you've got free cool air, free air conditioning. You just run your fan, but you allow the economizer to open the dampers and pull in a lot of outside air into the space and not have to keep recooling the recycled air or supercooling really incoming hot air. So these economizers, unfortunately, were known to the state of California to not really deliver the energy savings that the manufacturers had promised. And that had nothing to do with the manufacturers. It had a lot to do with how they were installed and how they were operated. And folks who were doing the installations not really realizing how to finish setting up the economizers if they were not factory integrated and already set up. And a common thing that one of our commissioning agents has seen is that the part of the controls that where the economizer connects and talks to the sensors and then to the building automated system, those things are not connected properly. And as a result, either the economizer just isn't working at all, or it's always pulling in too much outside air, which is a huge energy waste, or it's not utilizing any of the free cooling, which again is lost energy savings to the owner. So in this building in San Luis Obispo, the commissioning agent caught that early, and they got the economizers connected properly and made sure through the acceptance testing process that everything was working properly. So definitely, we're a big fan of commissioning, if you haven't figured that out from our few examples, few stories. Andy mentioned that documentation and training is also part of the commissioning process and is a requirement. And under Section H, they break it into two sections: your systems manual and the actual training. And in the code, it gives you an outline A through F of what is supposed to be required in the systems manual. And it's basic instructions for the operation and maintenance of the project. And well, it's important.
Right.
And
yeah. And it's super helpful to have the discussion about the systems manual and the training at that kickoff, because you really want to make sure that the contractor understands. You almost give them a table of contents, and I mean, digital, hopefully, maybe it's an online bunch of PDFs, but could be a physical binder, and you already got the tabs in there, and they're just like inserting the information. But also there's just like written instructions, like how to maintain a building. So putting all those things together, it's spelled out pretty clearly what is required, rather than just like thump each individual contractor going, oh yeah, here's here's some lighting things and here's a warranty, and what are you going to do with that?
Right. I had a story of one project where the builder literally handed over to the architect paper bags full of the owner of all the manuals that came with all the pieces of equipment, and just was like, here you go.
Okay. And then and then the training itself, we always make sure that it gets that there's an outline of the training, and that they know it's going to be recorded. They tend to take it more seriously, rather than like, oh, just flick this switch and go on, right? That like, oh, you need to talk about every part of the startup, what the protocols are, and we're going to be recording it. So, which is obviously good when there's change, turnover at a building.
Right. And so that second part on this is the training itself, and what the materials need to be included within that training. And our kind of advice on that is, make the training practical and make it useful, and really ask yourselves, can the people, the users, can they actually use these manuals you're putting together? I do think the recording is an excellent idea also, because a lot of folks, it's easier to watch that recording than to try and plow through lots of the paper that goes along with it. And we have a few examples here, both same building. Andy and I both have something to say about this San Luis Obispo building, where a lot of these things we just talked about with the training and the manual would have been super key to this particular building a project, and eventually it did come in. But this building, for example, has a daylighting, natural daylighting, and has passive cooling strategies. It includes those small windows at the lower part of that window wall that are operable, so the occupants can open it when the weather is good and have a connection to the outdoors. And that should be a great thing. But the people who work in the building need to be able to be trained and know when to operate those windows, and to understand if the windows are interconnected with the thermostat or with the heating and cooling system. In other words, if the windows are open, does one system shut off and the more passive, just fan natural ventilation system kick on? Those are just one of the things that need to be considered when you're setting up the whole training for everybody. So it's not just the training on, oh, here's your mechanical system for the maintenance people, but it's also for the operations for the folks that are using the project. Andy, I know you have some things to say about this building.
No, actually, I'm gonna leave it at that. Yeah, no, I think that was covered it about the occupants understanding. And I mean, when we try to have higher performance buildings, managing occupant expectations is really important. Like, hey, it's going to take us a little while to get this fine-tuned for who's specifically in the building.
Yes, and then some of the tools, right? Some of the tools that can be used for follow-up. That's not really, this isn't a code requirement, but this is more of like, if you're doing a building that is needing commissioning, to include occupant surveys, and to, like Andy said, let everyone know adjustments will be anticipated. This particular project was a lead project, so even though it wasn't maybe triggering commissioning under the current code, all of these things were dealt with anyway because of the lead points that this project was going for. But it's still applicable to when full commissioning is required. The commissioning report itself, like Andy said, it all gets packaged up together. So I'm going to let her remind us what all of those parts are that go into that commissioning report.
Thanks. And I'm about to lose power on one device and switch to another. So if I drop off for a minute, Jennifer, you'll have to carry on until I can get back on.
Oh yeah.
And so
okay.
Again, but honestly, I feel like the O&M manual is the most important part, but the commissioning report gives you all those commissioning things together so that the owner has a record, the OPR and the BOD all together, but also all those checklists, the pre-function checklist, the functional performance test, recommendations for ongoing commissioning, what to make sure you're looking for within that 12-month warranty period. It has the summary of all the training that's been completed. So again, it helps the process, the accountability of the process, so that the commissioning authority makes sure that they're collecting the outlines of the training sessions, the agendas, and any other, the logs, what they found in the logs. I think being able to manage those pieces as they go through, as well as their own executive summary of what's been happening. It just helps the owner to be able to make sure that the whole process has gone through in a consistent and thorough manner without anything slipping between the cracks. And so at that point, you're like, okay, commissioning steps, are we all done? And this is the outline. We've talked through them all. So yes, you've met the code requirements. Check, 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 check. And even though it's not required by code, there's all kinds of other commissioning options. There could be enhanced commissioning, so that you're having your commissioning authority review submittals. They are coming back 10 months after construction is complete and occupancy has been ongoing, but within that warranty period, and check all the systems again, do the occupant survey, check in with, are there any gaps? There's ongoing commissioning, and you check it seasonally, is everything performing well, measurement and verification. So LEED certification has options and additional points for these particular strategies. But otherwise, you check the boxes in terms of code. Then there's a few more options, but you've really gotten the bulk of the value is within that the 10 steps here that are required by code. But more can be done. Envelope commissioning, checking like the fenestration, air sealing, those types of things is also being increasingly popular as people are looking for ways to have lower energy use.
Okay, and with that, I'm gonna take over again. And so commissioning, we kind of went through the whole commissioning process, and that commissioning process is documented. Steps of the commissioning process are documented on the NRCC form for commissioning that you would fill online on Energy Code ACE. And you're making a promise, a commitment at that point, because it's needed for a building permit, that you're going to continue with all these steps. And then the big commissioning report at the end of all that goes to the owner. But along the way, the Energy Code does require some acceptance testing and installation forms and verification forms. And some of these are part of that commissioning process, or run parallel with it. They kind of spell out those acceptance testing, but other times, some of these forms are just going to be required anyway, such as for certain types of additions and alteration projects. And commissioning isn't required for the addition alteration projects, for example, but some of these forms will be, and there's overlap. So, I'm going to use this project as kind of an example and just kind of reference it as we go through this process of trying to understand what all those forms are. So why is acceptance testing required? And one of the acceptance tests is for the actual controls on lighting systems. And they can be day lighting controls, occupancy controls, vacancy controls. And it's really common, but easily fixed, to have issues with some of the controls. And in this particular building, this was commissioned, and this was before the acceptance testing was required, which then now tells us why we need acceptance testing. But it did go through a commissioning process, and mistakes happen, but it was noticed, I guess, finally by the occupants, but actually the wrong type of lighting control. A day lighting controller was put in a room that had no windows, and it was supposed to be a vacancy controller. So when people left the room, no movement, things shut off. But also there's things that can be triggered by those vacancy sensors, like false triggers caused by the HVAC air system turning on and causing movement in the room that keeps the lights on. Those kinds of things do happen. So going to dive into this a little bit. And for the forms, the Title 24 compliance side of it, there's the NRCA forms, the NRCI forms, the NRCV forms. Kind of what's the difference? Well, there's actually an NRCC form. That is kind of where we start. And that commissioning form that we showed you, it's an NRCC type. It basically means that it's a certificate of compliance. It's our performance calcs, our prescriptive components, or those other, the promise to do commissioning. AKA, we call all those forms together the Title 24 report. And then there's certificates of installation, acceptance, and verification, which are really to take place during and to be filled out during the bid and construction phase. So I'm going to walk you through what some of these forms are and where they show up in the process. And all of these forms ultimately get turned over to the authority having jurisdiction. So an example from a 2022 code cycle NRCC form, I just excerpt this from a project we're working on. This is our Title 24 form. And in that Title 24 form, there's a table L, a table M, and a table N. And each of those goes through and lists for you which of these NRCI, NRCA, NRCV forms are needed. And they're listed there, and they're listed by the type, whether they're the envelope, the mechanical, the plumbing, the indoor lighting, etc. The part where it overlaps with the commissioning is a lot of cases where it's the mechanical forms and the indoor lighting controls forms. Those overlap with what we just talked about for commissioning. In this Title 24 code energy world, there's a great resource, Energy Code ACE, same place where you find the fillable form. They kind of help spell out what these forms mean and give a reminder of what each of these abbreviations are. And right now we're going to focus a little bit on who's conducting the tests or who's to receive the information for the test. And so E stands for the enforcement agency, H stands for the HERS rater, F stands for a field technician, which essentially is a contractor. We'll talk about that also. And A stands for the acceptance test technician. And this is a key thing that we're going to spend a little bit of time on today, that acceptance test technician. Who is it and why do we need it? So back to this excerpt from our code. Table L dealt with the NCRI, and there's E and F, meaning enforcement agency and field technicians that will deal with those installation forms. And then there's the NRCA, the acceptance forms, and there we're going to have field technician, HERS raters, and A for acceptance test technicians. And then we've got our NRCV verification forms. And even though in this example, the H was left off, that particular form has an H on it for HERS rating, a HERS rater, sorry, for enclosure air leakage. Okay, so NRCI, you're going to get a copy of the slides, and so you can go back and reference this. This form is available online at the Energy Code ACE website, but this form is also a form fillable PDF that can be obtained on the CEC's energy.gov.california.gov site. And this whole intent of these NRCIs is to be completed during the bid process. And it's really to ensure, when it says your equipment, it's really to ensure that the builder, because this is again happening during bid and construction process, that the builder and their subs, that the equipment and materials selections comply before they actually go through and purchase it. And this is an example of what this form looks like. And because this is something that's being done before purchase, it's form fillable. There's some pull down menus. It is an NRCIF, meaning a field technician or the contractor, someone who is involved with that project and getting it ordered can fill this out. And the field technician is responsible for performing and documenting the results of the acceptance testing procedures, which will happen later on under the acceptance testing. And that field technician must sign the certificate of acceptance, which we're going to go into next. The field technician does not have to be a contractor, or have a contractor's, architect's, or engineer's license, but they may be also an ATT, which is an acceptance test technician. It's preferred that the same field technician that did the installation also perform the acceptance test, but it's not required. We will circle back around to that ATT and that acceptance testing in a moment. But before we do that, I want to use the NRCV for the field verification as kind of an example, because many of us are familiar with HERS verification. So the NRCV typically are demonstrated compliance with the HERS rater, and HERS raters, you may recall from maybe residential projects and multifamily projects, that HERS rater is trained, has a special license number, and is part of a HERS provider registry where they fill the forms out on the registry, and then that registry, like CalCerts or Cheers, then puts the official watermark on the form. There's some checks and balances within the online registries where you go to fill out these forms. And then once that's done, the architect, the Title 24 consultant, and the building departments can all access those watermarked official forms on that registry. So now we're at a point where we're doing this kind of the same thing with the acceptance testing for certain requirements. And here's just an example of the NRCV form. This one was for duct leakage tests. It asks for general information, duct leakage testing, if it's a low leakage air handler, additional requirements for compliance, etc. And then there's spaces where the documentation author can sign, the builder can sign, the HERS registry, data registry information, and the HERS rater information. Now, this is watermarked, saying this is only for data collection only and not valid until registered with the HERS provider. So then you could get these forms to see what they're about, but you won't be able to get the official one until it's registered. So same kind of thing now is happening with the NRCA forms, specifically for mechanical and lighting systems. And where you're going to be able to find more information on this is the CEC website. And there is a link that's going to help you find your ATT, or your acceptance test technician. And so these documents that end with the A, they have to be completed by a field technician or certified acceptance technician and submitted to the inspector. So all these come back to the authority having jurisdiction. And I think I misstated that. If it's an A, ending in an A, it has to be the acceptance test technician. But if it does, some of the forms do end in an F, then they can be completed by the field technician. So someone who is not necessarily an A. But most of these forms for lighting and mechanical systems are all going to be the ATT. There are just a few organizations that have the ATTs available. And so one of the questions we've been getting asked recently is from builders saying, where do I find an acceptance test technician? And so the answer is that they're gonna have to go to the actual websites of each of those organizations and find the technician who's working in their area. And it's each of these websites are searchable by county. So a little bit of history here. Previously, commissioning and a lot of acceptance testing, I mean, the whole idea about this was starting in the 2005 Energy Code, okay? But then it wasn't until 2016 Energy Code that there was enough, what they're called ATTCP providers that had technicians that could do that work. And so lighting was the first one that they had a kind of like a critical mass. And so in the 2016 code, lighting required that you have an actual ATT to do the lighting acceptance tests. And then it wasn't until late towards the end of 2021, so pretty recent in the building history here of having this critical mass of enough of the ATTs for mechanical acceptance testing. So prior, the CEC was telling authority having jurisdiction, was telling folks, hey, there's probably not enough or even an ATT in your area. So you might not be asking for these acceptance forms to be signed by that person or have these in this registry yet. But now, as of late 2021, so just over a year, they say, no, okay, there's enough folks now that are out there that the authority having jurisdictions are going to start asking for the acceptance tests and these documents and being signed by these folks who are authorized to do so. And so this is an excerpt from the California Energy Commission website. And then each of these, when you click on it, it links you, it takes you to the website where you can then search for folks who are active for under the 2022 code, or if you need them active under the 2019 code, and you can find them and start making some phone calls. And what I noticed online is that a lot of people, they'll either put the county that list the counties that they're available in, or in some cases, they just say all counties. So they're willing to travel through the US. And then there's requirements that these folks have to go through in order to be eligible and do the training and take the tests. Both classroom and laboratory training and testing is done for these acceptance test technicians. The Energy Code specifically asks for acceptance testing for the non-residential systems, for outside air distribution, fans, the controllers, the fault detections, etc. Anything that basically is mechanical system and uses energy. It also includes commercial exhaust systems and fume hood systems, lighting and receptacles for controls, when there's controls associated with that, also outdoor lighting controls, and then all the covered processes, including elevators, moving walkways, steam traps in your big boiler systems, critical CO2 refrigerant systems, refrigerated warehouses, et cetera. And in the non-residential appendices, NA7, it's all these acceptance tests and their requirements are listed. And there's about 16 different categories, and each one of these categories opens up into a whole nother set of requirements. So this is here for your reference. The energy code specifically references the non-residential appendices throughout these portions of the code. And for a lot of us, we read it, we go, okay, and then we pretty much know it's up to somebody else to do it. But if you want to dig in deeper and that is your line of work, this is where you find out exactly what's required. Plus, you've gone through all the training and should be able to do it. Give you an example of what that NRCA NEC form looks like. And again, it's similar to that HERS system. It's watermarked saying this is for informational use only. And it's not until you get the ATT, who is then working for the ATTCP, you know, that provider, when they upload the documents to their system, then they're going to be able to print and download the official form that goes to the authority having jurisdiction, and it will be watermarked with their logo and their license. So they go through pre-functional tests, functional tests. This is a multi-page document, by the way. And on the last, there'll be the sign-offs where it specifically is asking for the ATT certificate number and that person who's doing the test. Same thing for lighting. That's going to ask about the types of controls. In this case, it's asking about the automatic shutoff controls, and if they have occupancy controls, multi-occupant daylighting controls or sensor controls. And it's going to go through all the functional tests, and also the sign-off is going to include that ATT certificate number. So kind of full circle where we started, you know, why acceptance testing? Why are we going through all these pre-functional checklists and then functional testing? And why is this now being done by certified acceptance technicians? And it's really to ensure that we have properly functioning and energy efficient systems for the users, the owners, and frankly, our greater community. Because when our buildings are failing, I believe we're not a happy community, and we're definitely not moving towards California's goals to reduce the need for more power plants, more power systems. So it's kind of full circle of how our buildings are part of the picture for where California is going in terms of energy efficiency and reduced pollution and carbon emissions. So we catch, you know, faulty equipment or installation mistakes early. And it's really cost-effective long-term strategy for having satisfied owners and building users. If you need more help with any of this, I just want to remind you that 3C Ren offers their Code Coach service, and you can go on to 3C Ren and get a hold of the Code Coaches through the Energy Code Coach link that is highlighted with the blue arrow. And with that, I'm going to let Sarah tell you a little bit more about upcoming classes, but also Andy and I are totally available for questions, comment, discussions. It's such a small group. I mean, you guys could unmute and chat amongst yourselves and chat with us if you would like.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I'll just run through the closing slide really quick. Just a reminder, there's continuing education units available, both AIA and ICC. And as a reminder, there will be the slides and the recording that will be sent to your inbox likely by tomorrow. And then just for upcoming courses, we have our like a Central Coast and Ventura ICC chapter energy code series. And one that I do want to highlight is our passive house designer and consultant certification. It's in person at Santa Barbara City College. It's a great free training to get certified or to be able to certify any passive house projects. So with that, I do want to just launch a poll. It just helps us gauge the usefulness of the meeting and, kind of inform future meetings. So with that, I will open it up for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll stay on until about 11.
Todd, I know that you were interested in being able to support public contractors. Do you feel like you have some pointers for them, or any other feedback or questions that they've been asking, problems that you see?
Yeah, no, this presentation was great. I think it helps a lot, and that we can provide them a little more documentation up front. We had a couple of projects recently, HVAC replacement projects for K-8 kind of school levels, and the contractors sort of see the no commissioning required, and that kind of sets a tone in their head that nothing else is required. So we're like, no, we still have to do the acceptance testing and the functional testing. So make sure everything works right. And so that's where we've had some disputes or sort of drawn out close out of projects and trying to get that final over that final hurdle.
One of the things that we find is so helpful about that code coach is that you can use it, like anybody can use it. It's architects, engineers, contractors, subcontractors, jurisdictions having authority, inspector, plans examiner, all those folks. And it's a good way, like if somebody feels like they're getting, has a lot of questions or isn't sure where to start, like send them to us, send them to the code coach, so that you're kind of spared, right? And then we can get them in the right direction. So that's definitely a helpful way to just time management for folks.
Yeah, I was thinking about just adding that resource right onto the mechanical sheet, saying, this is this is a place you can go to.
Yeah, get some help. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that more as well, because in our area, we don't, I mean, I don't know everybody yet in our whole area who has their ATT, certification number, and if they've gone through the training, but especially, I'm not that familiar with everyone on the mechanical side. On the lighting side, there was at least one electrician that I knew who had done it, but I noticed when I went back and looked that they're not active for the 2022 code yet, right? But they're active for the 2019 code. And that was just the one person, and they're still listed as the one person in San Luis Obispo County. And so it's like, okay, so that's another thing. I can see that, where especially if the builders are they're like, what, we have to do this, and who do I hire? Which is some of the questions we're getting. Where are they? Who are they? And I was thinking that that would be a good exercise for us as a community to just figure out, okay, who's really in our community right now? The list has got to be small, and the CEC does say, go to the website, put in your county, and then start making phone calls. And so I noticed if you put in San Bernardino County, there's a bunch. If you put in Santa Clara County, there's a bunch. Sacramento, LA, you put in San Luis Obispo, you put in Santa Barbara County, Nothing. You put in Ventura, well, you're close to LA. So I mean, it's we're just on the
That
edge.
sounds like, right, we need to encourage some folks to get her done. You know, if they know that there's a market for it, they'll go ahead and get the training. So kind of builds on itself.
Yeah. 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 And then from all the things we've seen, just with the commissioning, what commissioning caught before the acceptance testing, you know, was being asked for because it didn't have that critical mass. You just know that it's the training, it makes sense why there's training, you know, the commissioning agent going out and basically, I didn't really talk about this part of it, but part of, you know, one of the things where the economizer wasn't working is the person doing the install really didn't understand and didn't know how to functionally test if the economizer controls were working. Like they had the instruction, they had the equipment from the manufacturer, but it wasn't set up properly and they didn't have a good sense of how to actually do the functional testing for it. So yeah, training it's important. It's important. Because what that means is, like in the case of economizers, is that we think as designers and Title 24 folks that, oh yeah, put in economizers. This is going to save you a lot of energy. You know, we say that to the owners, the design team. And then really it boils down to, is the actual person hired that's going to install that piece of equipment, have they actually been trained in how to connect it up properly? Yes, no. Is anyone going to come back and check it? Yes, no. So we're trying to put theory into practice. That's why we're big fans of commissioning and acceptance testing and training. We want it to be real, not paperwork theoretical.
Any other questions? I know folks need to get on with their day, but happy to answer questions if there are any. All right.
All right.
Well, sounds
yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, thanks all for joining us. The slides and recording will be sent out soon, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.